Hi everyone, so my name's Christina and I'm going to help facilitate conversation on loss. I'd first like to introduce these three individuals. Stephen, as we know, he's the Media and Operations Director at Parallax Press, and he's been performing solo theater since 2000. Teresa Trout is an expressive arts therapist trainee studying at the California Institute of Interval Studies, and she uses a variety of intermodal creative art modalities, including drama, dance movement, music, poetry, and visual arts with the clients she serves. And Dr. Matthew Mock is a distinguished national expert on the relevance of cultural competency and humility, ethnicity, and multiculturalism in psychotherapy with children, adults, and families. And he's also a professor of psychology at several Bay Area universities.
Regular guy, it should be.
So first, we do have some questions that I'm going to pose to each of these individuals, but I just wanted to start with each of them maybe sharing a personal experience of loss and how it might have shaped you, changed you, or how you may have dealt with that. And it can be any kind of loss, whether that's loss of a family member, or even a breakup, or a loss of a career.
Before we start,
yeah.
Could someone close the door and hit someone tall enough hit the switch for the air conditioning? I assume you guys are warm.
Well, I think someone did get it.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well, I'll just start by, if I might just transition from Stephen's show. My name is Matthew, and what came to mind, by the way, at the very end was like thinking about somehow Maya Angelou is on my mind, and what she said before she passed a couple of years ago was she said something akin to, you may forget what you read, you may forget what I said, but you'll always remember how I made you feel. And so I think that what you did and what you just shared definitely made me feel, and I sense others as well. I dedicate any comments this evening, real brief for me, to my father, and that's in answer to your question, who yesterday would have been 99 years old. He actually passed 3 years ago, and it knocked me pretty big, because I thought he would live forever, and I didn't think that we would have to confront that. And so he taught me in a big way about what it means to transition and to lose, but always to also have. And then also I dedicate tonight to somebody special to me, named Sharon, who's actually here, and teaching me about issues around personal loss and what that means. And I'll just say what affects me about both my dad and my dear one Sharon is that I always tell people that the way it impacted me was that I always thought I had a lot, and I always tell people that I think I'm a pretty nice person. And in seeing each of them go through their changes and of eventually losing my father and potentially Sharon, is that I feel like I've been made into an even nicer person just by even thinking about them and what they would want me to do and carry on. So it has affected me profoundly and powerfully, and I shall never forget. I'll say more shortly.
I'll go Teresa. My name is Teresa Trout. And, when I think about loss, in the last couple of years, I've lost a lot of people close to me in my life, including my father and a dear friend of mine to suicide. But when I think about loss, I actually think, and it kind of makes me laugh, but it also goes back to show that grief isn't one tangible thing. It's a cat I lost. And this cat that I lost I had lost grandparents, but I had never lost anybody close to me. And this cat that I lost, I've never, even some of the deepest, even my father's loss, did not impact me on the level of this cat. And it hit me in such a hard way. And it was very confusing because society doesn't really always hold cats or animals to the same standards as humans. But I felt it in a deep way, and it made me recognize that the grief is so individual, and it's how you experience it in your life, and it's what that meaning is to you. And I felt that. That was real for me. That animal served a role in my life, and that loss is something that I still feel. And so I think, honestly, a decade ago, losing this animal was something that cracked me open in a way, and honestly prepared me for these other series of losses that would come in my life. So.
Could you repeat the question?
Well, first I wanted to also say that I, coincidentally, Stephen came to an event of mine earlier at the beginning of the year. I host small events, and I just, a friend who had lost her father from cancer said, will you do this at your place and host a conversation on loss? Because I personally feel that we don't have enough platforms for this. It would help all of us cope and deal and make it more of something that, you know, we can talk about, not regularly or maybe regularly if we need to, but Stephen actually showed up to that event, and I feel very fortunate to have met him there. Just, randomly he was there, so it actually then, I didn't even plan for it, but loss kind of became my theme for this year. I lost my mom a long time ago, and I thought I had managed that grief, and that came up for me. And then also earlier this year in August, I lost a friend from suicide as well. And so I think to what both of you are saying, I think loss just becomes part of our life, but it also gives us a lot of space to then hold more love and the capacity to be there for other people who are also enduring a lot of loss. But I know that, you know, you built this performance, you know, largely around the issues with your father. So I don't know, just any insight on why you wanted to perform it now, and when you started writing, and how losing your father, although his physical body is still here, has affected you.
Right. So that's a little bit of a long story. So the Tastes Like Chicken was inspired by really a particular period in my life, 2008 to 2010, where I was experiencing an avalanche of loss, starting most significantly with the loss of my father to depression, and I think I talked about it in the play, but being a caretaker for my friend who passed away from cancer, and losing a job, losing a couple of jobs, a really meaningful career. So why doing it now? I mean, there's actually a lot of reasons. It's depression, or just was Depression Awareness Month in October. We are coming up in December, we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the housing meltdown, which also is pretty much the 10th anniversary of losing my father to major catastrophic depression. Personally, I think one of the main reasons is to not only give voice to my own experience of loss, which I found at the time unspeakable, because I didn't have the emotional competency to process the grief, but also to give others in the audience who may have experienced your own losses voice to your experiences of loss. If by chance you saw some of your, hopefully at least some of your experience reflected back to you on the stage tonight.
Now I'm going to ask Matthew a question, specifically talking about Asian American families and barriers that you might see to address mental health issues and not wanting to address those issues. Any specific examples I know, for example, for me, when my mom died, my father, as a Vietnamese man who saw a lot of death through the war, didn't actually know how to communicate with us, so immediately pushed us to a psychiatrist who actually also couldn't really help us. So I'm wondering if if you see that with some of your clientele, specifically any barriers to treatment and addressing mental health issues.
Sure. Well, I'll make it rather succinct, if you will. By the way, I'm a third-generation Chinese American, heterosexual, acculturated, born in Los Angeles, and I'm a first-gen graduate college student from Brown, and my own mother doesn't know what I do for a living because she starts her sentence in Chinese, finishes them in English, starts them in English, and finishes them in Chinese. So I grew up with this sort of mixed perspective, but I have always known, the short answer would be for everybody, it's like, well, Asians have no problems and we're a model minority. That would be done and we would be done for the evening. The longer story would be also that this idea about face, this idea about private face and public face, that's really important in terms of, if you will, the face, if you will, of how we think of ourselves, and this idea about never loss of face. And our face is not, and by the way, this is not just Asian, there are other cultures also that may share this, you may as well, but this is never about I, me, my, mine, right? But it's more of we, us. If I came into this room, I would fuss to make the room more comfortable for all of you before I acknowledge myself. That has its downside, which is if I should face some psychological issues or trouble with regards to loss, or painfully to face issues around thinking of suicide, I potentially wouldn't go to somebody else. Why? Because I would lose face, right? It's not about me, and also like, if you think it must be me, it must be my problem, it must be something about it, from a relational perspective, which is more the Asian perspective where you hear about as collective, there must be something that my parents did. They must be the problem. They didn't do the right thing. Oftentimes it's attributed also to mothers, unfortunately, but there must be something that was done. So that pressure of getting help, if you will, is exposing the family, exposing yourself. And so we have these also questions. Byron Good, he says two basic things. Check this out. Is that if we think about it culturally, about mental illness or depression or sadness, or why is all these things happening to me, of these compounded, unresolved, ambiguous losses, as Pauline Boss says, it would be, why is this happening to you, and why is this happening now? And that has totally different cultural lens to it. For Asian Americans, it's like attribution of, it must be something that I did, it must be my thinking, it must be something that has to do with my past, or maybe it has to do with my karma. Or maybe it's not in the same way from a Western perspective of, there's got to be something that's wrong with you, take medicine, right? There's got to be something I want to acknowledge elsewhere. So I would just say also why it's so hard is that still, and I base my career on this, and I'll close, is that we need to think about these things differently and think about things more relationally. I know there are therapists in the room. I see who you are. Therapists in the room. Didn't have to raise your hand. Sorry. And that, in our culture, in the Western culture, they say the DSM is diagnostic statistical manual, right? Text revision 4. Well, from a relational cultural perspective, it's actually dictionary of the socially maligned, tried repeatedly and intravenously fed. Because in the DSM, it's all about individuals. It's about, you must be sick, you must be wrong, you must be sick, you must be ill, as opposed to, I feel relational loss. I feel something that I feel sad because I don't have a relationship, I don't feel kinship, I don't feel included. Those are relational issues, but again, systems are not set up to, if you will, acknowledge cultural communities. And we're not alone in that part. Asians for sure, but also other cultural communities as well. So in closing, it's not because we don't have problems, it's because we see things differently, we also seek help differently, and fortunately I'm devoting my career and my life to also moving those things in a different direction. So we got to do better, and we will do better, and that includes Asian Americans. That's a long run-on sentence.
But I'm just wondering, because I know this, there is a lot of face, but what if you have somebody in a family, an Asian family who has, let's say, an addiction problem, and that family doesn't want to sort of the external world to see that that person has an addiction problem. So then they don't want to seek
Sure.
the help from the community or other close. What do you recommend for a situation like that? Because I think this face thing prevents a lot of like barriers, actually.
Yeah. There's a lot of things maybe we can open up to others. I feel self-conscious about, again, that we identity. Yeah, is that we have to like open up the lens and normalize some of these things. The Asian, we're not immune, if you will, to these issues around addiction, and that actually addiction is actually a big issue for the Asian community because it's tangible, it's behavioral, and to acknowledge how it affects, I would say, not just the individual, because that's why I say you're sick, you've got to get help. It's not just you. But I'm a family therapist, so I believe in terms of how is that impacted, how does it show up for families and why, and how does it impact the family? I've had more individuals who say, well, maybe I won't get help for myself, but if it affects my child, my daughter, then I'll get help, because then it has this acknowledgement of, because it also affects my family. And that's why there are mental health programs like the Asian American Recovery Services in San Francisco and in San Jose. They also they do lots of things where they bring in families and they talk about it and they have them. But I can do that. Where the individuals that have addiction issues, when they graduate from their program of addiction, they actually do a play that actually is a family play, a relational play that they bring up family members to make them a part of the solution, because they know that also has impacted the family. So there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot more that I will say, but I'm wondering about others also. Because we're a family up here. So.
What about your family, Stephen? How did they respond to your dad's mental health issues? The broader family beyond just immediate family. You don't have to answer.
Interesting you asked that because my siblings are here.
Okay.
Okay.
So we, I guess from a 30,000 sort of foot view, we handle it from, at least from how I've experienced it, from like a very functional way. We had meetings and we spent a lot of planning, a lot of time researching and talking to experts and going to a lot of appointments and it was just like a lot of coordination, recently I told my siblings about this project, and I was a little nervous because I didn't know how they would react. But when I told them what I was doing and why, they seemed very supportive. I think I don't know. Maybe another reason to do this is we just generally as a family, and I think generalizing broadly to Asian Americans, talking about processing emotions is not high on the agenda, and it's family dinners, and so it was meaningful for me to have my siblings here because it's sort of a way for them in a way to process what happened and hopefully have their experience reflected back in some way.
And I mean, I think I originally shook my head because the question is very specifically about Asian American families, and I was like, I don't think I can speak to that. But what I can speak to, what I've heard, is really the uniqueness of each family, but also different cultures on how they address issues of grief and loss and addiction and mental health, and knowing that different cultures have different viewpoints, and that within that, each family and subcultures have different perspectives. I think that's what you two have really spoken to very uniquely.
Yeah, I would just add also too. I think that one thing that Asian is that that we find that an integrative approach, which we're not there yet. My gosh, how long is it taking? But an integrative, more holistic approach, looking at other aspects that we don't normally about how these things are part of not just part of problems but part of solutions. spiritual aspects that are oftentimes not acknowledged, physical things that are often not acknowledged. And we do things with like Hmong shaman, and for Southeast, for Hmong in Merced. I set up that project. It's been now going 2 years. We have UC Davis doctors working with Hmong shaman, talking about issues around loss and trauma, particularly around compounded historical loss and trauma. And it's working. It's working. It's not just gardening, but it's actually doing something that even the Western doctors are saying, how did that happen? That person hasn't passed away, and that person has come back to norm because the shamans have come and said, no, we have a different way of understanding. And so listen to us, and we will tell you what it is that we need. We're not going to buy into what you think about it only is, which is only a single motive.
I think I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we'll open up the questions to the audience. Just about resilience. So how have you seen people, whether they're clients or friends, family members, grow through an experience of loss? Yeah, let's start.
Please.
But you know, it's interesting. I guess developing or growing through the loss. I feel like resilience for me is a core part of the human spirit. I think we see it so well in kids. Kids are incredibly resilient. You know, I think the more we learn and explore childhood trauma, we realize the impacts of that on adulthood, and yet children are resilient. And also the mind and the brain is resilient the more we learn about that. And so I feel like this is a fundamental part that has allowed us to be adaptable, because this human experience is full of loss, and that's including natural grief, natural loss, with natural disasters, but also all of the human and all the things that we as humans have done and continue to do. And so I feel like one way that we evolutionarily have adapted to that is through resilience. And so I think when sometimes these situations arise, there is something that awakens in us. And I think we see that when we see large tragedies, especially when we see large community tragedies or things, and how communities come together. So I think it's part of our natural spirit of how we actually survive, because without that, I think the weight of what we experience would be simply too great.
Well, I guess my main expression of resilience is through the arts and theater, and it's interesting because Matthew, I'm sure you can, and Tracy can probably speak. I'm sure speak much more to this, but I was recently introduced to the concept of ambiguous loss, and Pauline Boss, I believe, is the foremost expert. And she talks about how when people experience really devastating loss, they go through go through a dark period, and then if they're able to get out of that, she often finds people who are able to, if they're able to process and accept, or just process loss, that often she sees people sort of bursting with these like new creativity in their life, and that was certainly the case for myself with Taste Like Chicken.
Pauline Boss, because I'm fortunate to interact with her and talk to her at different meetings, but yeah, she talked about, she's probably the most written about this idea about ambiguous loss rather, and this idea, by the way, that you said powerfully when you were acknowledging your dad, you said that we know that you're in there somewhere, and that really captured it, right? We know you're in there somewhere, but we can't see you, we can't touch you, we keep trying and trying and trying. This idea about you're there, but you're not there. She talks about the idea about two types of loss, right? You're physically there, but emotionally, psychologically not. Or you're psychologically there, but you're physically no longer the same or not there. And she talks about 5 things that I noted down, that despite the loss, when I think about, some people says, just you had this loss, just move on. Yeah, that's easier said than done, right? And oftentimes it's because you can't tolerate the pain, or maybe you can't acknowledge the pain of the other person. But I agree with you 100% that loss is something that's part of life. She said that there were a couple of things just conceptualized. This idea, maybe with the loss, maybe one way to also acknowledge it through your own resilience is that one, to find meaning of what the meaning of loss may mean to you and to the other person. Adjusting and also finding other kinds of mastery, if you will, of kind of coming back to terms and actually going beyond it in some way. Reconstructing identity, and by saying reconstructing identity, also in terms of relationship, and I'll just tell you some few clinical things and I'll stop. Normalizing ambivalence, so this ambivalence about how could it be and what is it about, and this ambivalent relationship, well, you come to terms with something in a way that maybe feels more resolved. Revising your attachment or connection relationally to that person. And then lastly, maybe more close to resilience, is discovering new hope. And I'll just, so I don't say too much, just two things that just come to mind. A couple was about to break up, and their relationship was, that actually was an Asian couple. And the other thing we don't do because of faith is we don't divorce very much. We don't divorce often, even though there's contentious relationships like many. And this couple was going to do, they said, we can't divorce because we have a child, and we can't divorce because then my parents and family will say that we lost face because we failed them because our relationship didn't succeed. And what happened, you reminded me, is what happened. A beloved cat that they had actually, unfortunately, got killed by the neighborhood dog. And I remember doing a powerful session that we can't divorce because we can't experience the loss. And they said that our child was devastated by that cat being killed. And they came home, and the child was in pain, and both of them came together and helped that child resolve that loss of the cat. And then shortly afterwards they said, you know what? With that loss, we wouldn't want to have that our dear beloved cat die. It was almost like another child. Is that we know our daughter could live through our separation and divorce, and they started that process. I mean, there's something to be said to them about it. They said, no, our child is resilient. We can see how she's bounced back. We can see how she's made meaning of this. That's made her life even stronger and made her even more poignant about valuing each of us. We can do it now. And that triggered, if you will, this process where they said, well, how did your daughter deal with it? How did she hold that? How did you talk to her about it? How did you address that in such a way? And it was just to me, it was just a beautiful thing.
I just want to open up questions to all of you and see if you have anything you want to ask.
Brene Brown always says anger is a bodyguard to grief. What do you think? What do you think about that? Or is anger just sometimes just anger? Does that resonate or spark any brain cells?
I don't know. I have to think on that one.
Well,
I had a therapist a few years ago who said to me something similar to that, in that you have to understand that your anger is your first response to something, and that there is something underneath that anger. So when you are really angry, you know that there's actually another emotion that's under that. So I think there is a lot of truth to what Brene Brown says. I use the example of road rage all the time. I don't think I'm a great driver, but I also don't appreciate people yelling at other people. I think it's every time I see somebody that gets so wrapped up about, like, I don't know, a biker or whatever that's happening on the street, I think that I feel bad for them, because I think that there's something really wrong if another driver or whatever is happening can cause so much frustration. That's not about the other car. That's about something that's inside of that person. So I think, yes, we do need to look at anger, and if you have people around you, you can do it yourself, like probe and try to find what's underneath that. It could be sadness, it could be frustration. But yes, I do think anger's it's a red flag for something else.
It's protection.
Yeah.
And I would add in there, I mean, I do resonate. I mean, I like a lot of the work of Brene Brown, so I'm kind of like, I think she does incredible and she's done a lot of research around resiliency and vulnerability, and I would say it depends, I guess, on how you're kind of saying that. Anger is what was the phrase?
Bodyguard of grief.
Bodyguard of grief. I also don't. I don't want anger to get a bad rap. I think misguided anger can be quite destructive and really problematic and painful, and yet I think anger expressed in a cathartic way can help. So I believe that yes, I think that there are a lot of layers underneath anger, and anger can be maybe that first entryway, but that a lot of times you have to go through it. And I think that that's one thing that resonated or stood out to me in the performance was some of the moments where anger did come out. And as an art therapist, I think a lot of things I work with is using drama theater as an expressive means of therapeutic creation, and to express that and to find the ways to express that and externalize that, to get that out of our body so that we then can go into those other layers and make peace with all of that. So I just want to name that, because sometimes I think we're like, anger, bad, and it's like, well, you know, some anger can be not okay, or challenging when it's misguided at the wrong people, but I think healthy expression of anger is essential, especially when we're talking about grief. Especially when we're talking about things that we can't understand, when we're asking those questions of why, how, I don't understand. We're trying to reconcile that.
One of the things that's helpful to me, it comes to mind, is hope I don't fall too far afield, but particularly with Stephen, what you shared in terms of your narrative and your play is also, you know, just your personal reactions to it, which I think, by the way, I appreciate. We'll open up about that comment, but just in terms of emotionality, particularly for Asian men culturally, and that protest. And I just will answer the question. I do a lot of work around racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, otherisms, you know, power over. And Ken Hardy acknowledges, writes about the phenomenon of rage, and he writes about the phenomenon of rage, and he said sometimes it's protests that people have because they get so mad and angry about things are not fair and things are not just, and why me, and why does this happen now, and all this other stuff. The other side is that anger and depression maybe are closely connected, and sometimes maybe sort of the two sides of the same coin, right? And he says that sometimes that I think about rage or anger as protest. Why me? And actually, I react when I saw your piece before as gifted. It's so gifted again, and I actually had a chance to think. Wait, sometimes it's rage. But if you're a wordsmith, by the way, you think about it as outrage. And that's what's important. If you look up the word outrage in the dictionary, not on Wiki or whatever it's all, but look it up in the big fat dictionary, you'll say outrage comes from the word two terms. It actually comes from the French outre, O-U-T-R-E, and rabia, R-A-B-I-A. Rabia is close to what? Rage. Rabies. What happens when you get rabies? What happens when you get rabies? If it's not treated?
You go mad.
Eventually you go mad. So that word is that actually, if you look at it, it's being driven beyond madness. And what came up for me was that some of the things you said about, I can't believe you did this, you took the house, you took him, and then you had this relationship, and then you took my job, and then San Francisco State, and how many more indignities, if you will, or pain can you experience? And then it comes out in this way, almost like releasing a pus, if you will, from a bad boil or a bad blister that you have, right? All of a sudden this outrage comes out. People say, why are you so mad? Well, partly it's mad at the protest, I think, of like, please, this pain. It's something I wish I didn't have to endure. Why me, why me, why me? So I think they are connected. And it's overly simplistic, I think, but that's how I also experience it. And that's how I also deal with it clinically, and it seems to also.
I think I would agree with Brene Brown in that assertion, at least for myself. I think just speaking very generally, and if I could sit myself down in my psychologist's armchair, that it's my observation is that as a culture we generally lack the emotional competency to experience and process grief, and that was certainly true for myself when all these things, all this loss was rolling in. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I knew it was overpowering, and I didn't know how to express it or be with it. But I do know anger. And so, I think that's how I was able to, I guess, be with that grief initially was through a lot of anger.
one more question? You guys have anything else? to say?
What are the thoughts or reactions on your part? You've been sitting, and
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that. We're grateful for that.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your experience. And I think just personally, I know that grief is really terrible in my own experience, and I also know that it's survivable. And I think, yeah, the more we can have these conversations, and the more people know that it's not an isolated thing, it's actually part of everyone's life all the time, and to different degrees and for different reasons, of course affected by power and privilege and all the things, but I think it's just really helpful to have that kind of space. So I really appreciate you sharing all of these really intimate parts of yourself, and I really respect it. And thank you everybody else. I'm appreciating all the good personal and clinical goodies.
Thank you.
And by the way, I just appreciate this forum, and whatever it was months ago when you contacted me, I didn't know this is what I would be going through this evening personally, and also Teresa, you shared more before we came in, and there's a lot more to share with others, and grateful to meet you. And also Christina, also. And before we end, I mean, did you also, this is also something that's stuck in the moderator, did you have something you wanted to share in also closing? Because,
No.
no?
I think you-
She's writing something. She's writing something very special of her own memoir. So we should also support her in finishing that, because she has a lot more also to say and to share with others. So, and I'm sure you do as well. So thank you, everyone. Blessings. 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 Thank you.
Just before we close, just want to give some much-deserved thanks. This went through many adventures getting this production here, and I was very fortunate to find Nicole Gluckstern, who's in the back, is managing the lights and sound. Of which I will be up the creek without a paddle. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Laura, the person at the front door, and my roommate. She's also security tonight, so behave yourselves. Also, my friend, the wonderful band that you heard tonight.
Yes.
Used to be Strangers, Terry Saul, Leslie Schneider, Bill Saul, and Eric Hughes make up Used to Be Strangers. And of course, deep appreciation to each of you.